Hey, peace and blessings, family. Welcome to this conversation on this Sunday night as we look at what's next on the agenda since the election is over. Everybody had their say about what we should do about this, that, and the other. So I brought back some people who I value what they say a lot, their history, their work, the way they brain work, how they get things done. And tonight we're going to start off just by talking about, so we have Nolise Edwards, we have Brother Daryl Roberts, we have Sister Modupwe, and we should be joined on by two more people, but we're just going to get started. What we want to look at first is what would be the top 5 items you think we should have if there was a Black agenda? Because everybody talked about this Black agenda when it was election. Now there's no election. People don't won, lost, or whatever. What should those things be? What should those top 5 items be? So who wants to go first with their 5?
Well, I'll go ahead. I'll go first. So this is Nolise. Thank you, Ro, for having me on your show today. So 5 things that come to mind. It's really, I think it's an agenda, period, whether it's Black or not. I think it's something that we all need to look at. But specifically, I think given how this election was in terms of the way Black folks and Black women came out and voted and how close it was in so many, different states. I think a couple of things, and this is in no particular order. One of the things I think we ought to continuously look at is our voter education and mobilization. That's keenly important, especially with young folks and women. But, what do we do now post this election, right? How do we keep the momentum going? How do we keep people engaged? How do we make sure that we, our numbers continue to increase in terms of, voter registration and why, especially with the young folks, why they should vote. And then the other thing I was thinking about was, so how do we plan for what's next, right? I mean, whether it's a statewide election, a local election, a local measure, we have these initiatives and things that come on the ballot, and whether they pass or not, do we think proactively about what's next? If they lose, what do we do to plan, right? Because we know there are things why they were put on the ballot that maybe we didn't like. For instance, Measure A. I was a strong in opposition to Measure A, for the equity pieces that were included. But how would we have held folks accountable if it passed? How are we going to hold the council accountable now, even though it went down, right? And so what's our plan for how we look at things pre and post on the ballot or if it's a race or what have you. The other thing I was thinking about was the Democratic Party, and or if you're Republican, the Republican Party. How is it that, because I think that they're both very, very disconnected with where Black people are and Black Black perspectives and issues. What do we do about that? How do we, how is it that we make sure that they are, they can't look at, the Black vote and the women vote, which was strong, as just one lump, like, look at it as all the same, because it's not. And the other thing I was thinking about was building a bench for folks who are who would like to run for some office, right? How do we look at building a bench, whether it's a local race, whether it's city council or state, school board or a statewide race? How do we look at building a bench of individuals who are ready, or who we can develop to be ready? And my lens is obviously Black folks, but really Black women. So how do we look at building a bench for that? So we can have, because we're always seeking and searching who's going to run for what, right? So if something happens in this Senate seat, depending on if Congresswoman Bass gets it, who runs in her seat? If Sydney runs in Holly's seat, who runs in Sydney's seat? Locally, you got folks, running for city council. that's going to come up in the next couple of years. How do we look at who we can outreach to build the bids for running for folks that are ready and to run for those seats. And I think that was 5, right?
Yeah, I know. I got the table for the voter registration and education.
Oh, my last one was communication. It was just, and that actually goes along with, I think, how we look and plan for what's next, pre and post, is about how we communicate with our community and organizations, and not just the same ones all the time, right? And I go back again to Measure A, how that was pulled together, and some of the key, that some of the group that was at the table, which I have no problem with. I like all those groups, but that being at the table and then said, okay, we've gone out to the community. I have a problem with that. So how we build a communication base for issues.
Right on. So before we move to that, you talked about Measure A, and I know Daryl, I think you were on the other side of that, correct? Is there a way for us to, even when we're on opposite sides, because I think we'd be on opposite sides still working towards the same goal.
Right.
It's like somebody said, I think it work if it was full. So I think it work if it was half empty or whatever. How do we get that together? Like people who may be on different sides, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we do that, but.
So Measure A being one of those issues where we didn't agree, and that's unusual. Me and Alicia were normally on the same side on
right. Absolutely.
And being on the other side was interesting because I also saw some people who lined up in opposition to Measure A, who oppose many of the community initiative we have pushed over the last so many years as well. So I, was interested to watch the firemen and the police line up against Measure A with folks who I normally support and normally on the same page. So yeah, there's a conversation that needs to be had, and Elisa's right about politics, long-term, short-term, who's up next, who we're training to be up next, who's talking to leaders about how long you're going to be in a space, what other position you might want to have. I think I looked at Ro, this question, and all 5 of the issues that Elise talked about are important. I looked at really more locally and looked at more just normal issues. And some of those issues, like Nolise said, was to try to keep people engaged who seem to be involved for the first time ever, and try to get them to understand, stay engaged no matter whether your candidate won or not. More importantly, you being engaged supports and benefits our neighborhoods and our community. And we as Black folks have at times kind of gotten away from it because we liked or didn't like a particular candidate. And to me, that's where we've not grown up politically. I looked at some things and wrote a little different. One, I'm really one that looks at every 6 months, because I look at the budget process as it being every 6-month process locally. And we got to stay connected. We got to understand right now people are talking about the city budget that'll be talked about in January. Literally right now, that's what's happening. So if you go to the January meeting, they've already decided what's going to happen at the mid-year budget. They've already decided whatever new revenues come in, they're going to decide it, and there's going to be direction that people want you to spend those dollars. So for me, one of the things is being really aware, be more knowledgeable and more engaged in the budgetary process. We wait until June to talk about the budget, and quite honestly, the budget is a year-round document, and we've got to start recognizing that. So for me, one of the things that I saw came out quite in my District 2 city council race, a lot of people were concerned about the quality of life, the basics, trash pickup, how dirty our neighborhoods is, how much we have in terms of trash on the street, junk cars on the street. Those are things that can be dealt with by the city, and it takes a different prioritizing for that to happen. But that's when you get involved. That's when you tell your local council member, and it looks like we replaced Councilmember Warren, but whoever the next council member needs to hear from us. And Sean needs to know that these things are important in District 2. Same thing for District 8. New council member is now representing District 8, to make sure that person knows what's important to you. So for me, I even said, look, we need to have a designated cleaning crew. It's a shame for me to continually have to call downtown to City Hall, to the city structure, to pick up trash, to move wrecked cars, to pick up television sets that are set on the corner for weeks at a time. But we got to do that. We need to start telling that city needs to reprioritize and invest in our neighborhoods in the way they do in Land Park, East Sacramento, and other neighborhoods where this simply doesn't happen. Because neighbors will not allow it to happen. Curtis Park, it will not stay on the corner for more than 48 hours. And if it's on the corner for 48 hours, somebody's going to complain. Actually, a number of somebody's going to complain. We got to reinvent ourselves that way. I looked at the reinvestment in specific neighborhoods. Nolise mentioned that when she talked about the inclusive economics around Measure A. But more important, this was also what Measure U called for. Inclusive economic strategy that would benefit our neighborhoods differently. We have to require the mayor and the city council to not only revisit that, but to point to that as an important part of what happens in our city. Thirdly, fulfill our investment in young people. We keep talking about what's happening in the streets. It is a direct result of us not investing in young people. What's happening in the streets on Friday, Saturday, too many nights, too many broad daylight shootings are happening because young people between the ages of 14 and 25 years old do not value life. But we didn't take the time we really should have to invest in them. So as a result, we're seeing that happening now. So for me, reinvesting in young people and investing in young people has to take on priority. Fortunately, the city had the wisdom to decide that it now is going to talk about youth investment in the same manner it talks about law enforcement, public safety. That makes sense. We got to talk about that. We also have to talk about mental health and some of the challenges there as we talk about how do we deal in our neighborhoods. I'm probably going to say something that's going to cause some people, including Nolise, I'm probably going to catch you, but I think we need to review the city employee salary structure. I'm sorry, we do. And I think we should go one step further. We should look at the fire department and look and see whether they're using the best practices as it pertains to how they're doing their job. That's not my bailiwick, but I do know that I've heard continually that we are overpaying in the police and the fire department because we end up looking at all the folks making these crazy dollars in overtime. Well, something not right about that. And I know as somebody who has an organization, if I needed to hire more staff because my staff was charging me double time on a regular basis or overtime on a regular basis, that's something that we'd have to look at organizationally. So I call on the city to do the same thing. Look at the salary structure. When they came out with those 25 or top 50, whatever the number was, folks who made much of their salary was based on overtime. And to me, it's like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we need to think about whether or not we need to have one more person, or do we need to restructure how this being done? So I know that's not going to be popular, but I'm not running for office, so it doesn't really matter. I think we got to talk about doing things differently.
Right on, right on. What about you? If you're joining us, we're talking about the agenda after the election. Where should we go from here? Now that we know who's going to be sitting in what seats and what's passed and what's not passed, what is the plan? Y'all all made some great points so far. Like, those are things we should all definitely be looking at, not just a hot topic. You talked about those salaries. That makes absolute sense. That makes absolute sense. So what about you, Ifeoma Dubois?
Just to piggyback on the city salary structure, I think also there needs to be some corrective action for leadership that goes over the budgeted amount of overtime. They were grossly over budget, and still, the city paid. And so I think that there's a lack of communication. Well, actually, there's a lack of accountability when it comes to things like that, because it's just assumed that that's a part of the public safety structure. But I think we need to have a new conversation around public safety. We need to redefine it for ourselves. What does that mean for us? Because there are some things that we rely on the police for that maybe the police are not equipped to do. And then there are things where there are areas where the police has overstepped their bounds, where law enforcement oversteps, and we need to look at the people who are actually doing that work and integrate them into the public safety budget. So that they can be paid for that. But it's going to take a redefinition of public safety, because right now that means police and fire department for the most part. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I think, Nalise, you mentioned this, a bench for public office. We need to begin to identify, like, we got a lot of leadership cohorts and programs and all type of stuff going on in the city, and some really powerful outcomes, for the people involved. But we need to begin to identify potential candidates for some of these positions and start the process of grooming them, because it doesn't make any sense that they don't know anything about the city's budgetary process. They don't know anything about how different how different agencies operate. They don't have any sense of that part of it, except maybe on a personal level for things that they've had to deal with personally. But in terms of being an effective advocate, and then advocacy training for people who are interested. If we're calling ourselves activists, then we need to understand who to call for what.
Right.
There are certain things that only take a phone call, but because we've gotten used to operating in a certain way, we see activism in a certain light. Sometimes it's just because of a lack of political education that we'll position ourselves in ways that we can't get nobody on the phone. You know what I mean? Like, I understand the way that the Black Lives Matter movement moved in Sacramento, and I'm just using them as an example. And this is a generalization, so if you get offended, I apologize. But I understand why they moved that way, but a lot of it was lack of political education. That some of those moves, nobody should have been back in some of those plays. There should have been some correction. There should have been some conversation about, so in the event that one of our children is at the county jail and getting the beat down, like, who can their mother get on the phone? You know what I mean? If I call you because you're a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, because my child has been arrested, and you can't get nobody on the phone to give me no information because you've alienated everyone, that makes you not an effective advocate. And so we have to have real conversations about things like that. And sometimes people's feelings are going to get hurt. But the truth is that at the end of the day, the people that we say we're advocating on behalf of, which is, the wholeness for our community, it matters more than our individual feelings. I think we need to give more attention to education in general, just how we control the education of our children, what type of support they need, where the support is coming from. Is that something that we're focused on getting fully funded? Because the thing is, this is California. There's a lot of money floating around.
Mhm.
We're in the capital of the richest state. So we shouldn't the last thing we should be complaining about is funding.
Mm.
And so if we are, then there must be an untapped part of the brain trust. There's somebody who knows where the money is, and we need to get that person on the phone. We just need to start moving around in that way, like less based on personality, more based on mission. We need to determine where each of our lanes are, whatever it takes for us to determine what your lane is and wear your lane out. Really get proficient in your lane and commit to delivering more excellently on your mission, because everybody's not going to do the same thing, and that's fine. And that's my last agenda item, is for us to articulate shared values. So whatever it is you're doing, and I know I'll say this every time, whatever it is that you're doing, you understand what our objective is, because we share values. Now, that means you could be a Democrat or a Republican. I might not agree with how you're doing what you're doing, but if it holds up against the values that we've said explicitly that we stand for, then can't get in your way too much. I could say a little bit of something about how maybe I don't agree fully with how he's doing that, but he is aligned with the values. So, at least if you can explain it as being aligned with the values, then the rest of us will leave you alone. Otherwise, we're gonna jump you. No, I'm just playing.
Oh, you really?
What I thought about, thank you for adjusting the camera, Daryl. I thought about it immediately. Like we have 2 city council races that they have 2 new city council members.
Yep.
What should we do once someone gets into office, like in your local city? I mean, it's one thing to talk about the president, but what should we be doing locally? Somebody's listening, they're from District 8 or District 2 in particular. How do you go down and make your, not say list of demands, but these are the things that, I put you in there. So this why I put you in there. How do you do that? Because even though it sounds real simple, but sometimes it's not.
Right.
It goes back to, I'm sorry, Joe, did I cut you off? I'm sorry. Oh, so it goes back to really communication. But first, I wanted to say something real quick. When the sister talked about shared values, I really, that touches a lot of what I was thinking, and I do think about, especially now that we are in this COVID-19 environment, and it's all about economic recovery moving forward. And what that looks like, because we're all mostly remote. And we went remote because it was, an emergency, and we're still in the emergency. But now what does that look like? And so what does that look like for our kids for access to school? What does that look like for, digital access? What does that look like for healthcare? What does that look like for, the aging population? What does that mean for them? And all of this I look at, where are the shared values and all of that, and how you look at that with an equity lens, right? Because that's key. So I just wanted to say that, because you really touched on a good point. And I didn't say your name because I don't think I know how to pronounce it, and I didn't want to embarrass myself. So I apologize for that. But reaching out to the council members, and Daryl will I'm sure agree with this, because we've been doing this a long time with these council folks and county folks, and I work more on the city council issues. But it's all about outreach and networking, right? It's about you see who's coming in, and whether you're doing this as an individual advocating or whatever, or you're doing it as part of a group, or an organization, and or an issue that's out there. To me, it's about outreaching to these folks and having the conversation, right? Whether you are talking to them personally, or you're getting to their chiefs of staff or their district folks about, identifying. I'm big on, as I'm a lobbyist by trade, right? So I'm big on identifying who's actually doing what. If I don't actually need to just quick talk to that council member, right? I may not need to talk to him he or she right away, but I do try and figure out who's got their pulse in the community, right? Because he or she knows about that pulse in the communities, because he's got folks out there, right? And so it's about communicating and establishing a relationship, even if you agree to disagree, right? Because there are a lot of things that I advocate on that folks are not, I'm sure a lot of them don't agree with where I'm coming from. But the point is, they represent, districts, and I'm in District 3 actually for the city council. I'm in Harris's district, but it's about outreach and getting to know who they are, and for them to know who you are, and for them to understand what your connections are, right? When you're talking about an issue, or you're talking about something that's happening, it's value in numbers and strength in numbers. And if they see, because look, it's sometimes politics trumps policy, right? And if they see, sort of where, who and what you're connected with, and what the swarm of strength you can come in with, on an issue, that's important. So to me, it's just, you go back to basics, you go back to outreach and communication.
Yeah. What about you, Daryl? Anything you want to add on to that?
Just what Nolise said, and I took a look at it from a personal standpoint. Yes, contact the new elected official. If you are an advocate or an activist in a neighborhood, they already know you, whether you supported them or not. So the easy thing to do is simply introduce yourself, so they may have not. So for me, I've been knowing Maya for 20 years. So been knowing my bank for 20 years. I didn't support mine. I told her that from day one. I just let her know that we move forward. Politically, that's not an issue. So my thing now for mine, she knows this. When Daryl Roberts calls her, he's going to be calling about an issue of importance for the community. Don't need anything personal. That's one. Second, newly elected city councilman of District 2. Met him at a holiday labor gathering, no least, no less. He introduced himself to me. I explained to him that I was already supporting his opponent. He laughed. He made a joke about putting a sign in my yard. I told him probably would be a wasted sign, so don't put it in my yard. We're good. Keep moving from that personal standpoint. But from a community standpoint, I also know I represented an organization which is active in District 2, as well as the other districts. So even in District 4, my colleague Katie Valenzuela, once she won, at least lets her recognize who I am. Katie's going to have to decide, or any elected official will have to decide how they deal with me, but I know I'm going to deal with them straight up, be above board about the issues, and deal with those things accordingly. Now, sister, you're going to say your name out loud so I can hear it, and then both Nolisa and I can say it. Go ahead. Say it because I want to say something. Ifeoma Dubois. And I'm going to mess up 5 or 6 times so Nolisa get a chance to follow behind that. Ifeoma Dubois.
I'm not going to say it.
You mentioned the activist versus advocate. And I think there's a distinct difference. And I think people have to accept the fact that some people see themselves as advocates. They don't see themselves as activists. They don't see themselves as advocates. Very different role. And I think we have to start recognizing who sees themselves as an activist. And you may have bumped into Black Lives Matter members who see themselves strictly as activists.
Yeah, that's true.
And they should be allowed to be that. Because for me, I used to be an advocate as I was younger. As I got older, I became an advocate because I recognized my ability was more to communicate across the board. So I became an advocate. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What I was saying, though, is that's nothing wrong with either one. But for me, it's making sure that people recognize how they're seen. So there are times I'm just not going to be in the streets, but I'm sure going to do what I need to do as an advocate to make sure those who are in the streets have a right to be in the street and are protected while they're in the streets.
Yeah. On an individual basis, I think that's true, but organization-wide, as soon as you begin to say that you represent Black people in policy, you become an advocate.
Amen.
So I need to.
You don't have an argument with me.
I need to be able to hold the
I agree.
accountable for certain things.
Yep.
To be able to move around in certain spaces if they say that's what they're up to.
Got it.
I don't. My thing is, I think we're really good at saying who we are and how we feel about things, but we may need to look at how we express what we're up to.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean? Our mission statements for our organizations need to be real clear, because if your mission statement says something, then I feel very comfortable calling the leadership on what the mission statement says.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. So y'all said something that was really key, because sometimes I feel like we kind of struggle. Like Black folks to me is like the hype man in the movie. We could get you so hyped up. Like we just got finished watching the election where a Black woman in Georgia was not the VIP pick, but she got, the presidential candidate over a big hump in her state. So it's one thing to be the hype man, but how do we ensure that we really are getting something out of this process and not the process of representation of seeing Black faces in places? How do we get what we need, like the immigrant community gets what it needs, and the LGBTQ people get what they need? How do we do that for Black folks in this city of Sacramento? Because we're all in Sac.
Well, I think it depends on. I mean, every issue, right, is different. Every platform is different, but it depends on accountability, right? I mean, we get through this, and then it goes back to what I said about what's next. And I am myself at sometimes at fault for not thinking things through about, okay, I'm here's why I am on this issue. And depending on what happens with this issue, what am I going to do to make sure I'm accountable for what it's supposed to do, what the outcome is supposed to be? And I think that those are things that we all have to take, whether we're individual or we represent organizations. I'm chair of a small women and girls organization that does things within the city. It's how we look at that and figure out what's next. What are we going to do? What are we responsible to make sure that the outcome for whatever the issue was or is, how do we make sure that it happens? And then we have to own that, right? And a lot of times we don't, and I put myself in that category because sometimes I'm like, okay, I've advocated for this. I think this is great. And then I'm sitting back and I'm sort of watching what's going on versus really taking a deeper dive and saying, what is my role and my part in terms of this accountability to make sure the outcome is what we want? And that has to be on a consistent basis. That just doesn't end just because, right? It has to be consistent. We just have to be consistent about that.
I remember getting cussed out on Facebook the day after Trump was first elected. I'll never forget sister who I would never put a name out, but I said the next day, right after the election, once they announced he had won, Donald Trump has won. I'm going about my business, doing the work I do every day with Roberts Fan Development Center. And the sister came right behind and said, "F you, bam." Okay. For her, she wasn't ready to move on. But for me, after political victories or losses, I have to work the same way. And that may seem like that I don't get excited or I don't enjoy it. People who know me know that's not true. But the reality is the work that I do really is not going to be impacted by somebody else sitting at City Hall. It's going to be impacted by my local actions and what I do. Now, some people may say, well, we need to hold the city accountable for employment, increasing employment of Black folks. Agreed. But I'm going to tell you what I do as an organization. I employ 50 to 60 Black and brown folks every year round. So that's part, and I serve 500 to 600 kids and their families every year round. So I also say we have some responsibilities ourselves to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable first, then begin holding others accountable using our work as an example. So if you ask me, Ro, about the new council members coming in, I'm going to show them an organization that is working in their district, doing work in their district. Now, you don't want to work with us, that's your call. We still are going to continue to work because I've been in long enough. I had 8 years of a council member, I won't even have to say their name, who couldn't stand my dirty drawers, didn't stand me. Love my wife, couldn't stand me, and verbally said that.
We all love your wife, Daryl.
All I'm saying is I get that. I understand politics can sometimes be personal. Those who take it personal, that's on them. I don't have time for that. I make it what it needs to be. It's about trying to change the lives for our children and families. So my work as an advocate, as well as sometimes as an activist in the streets in a different way, totally. But that's the other part. But I also will tell you, I recognize the battles that occur when you take on activism. Or take on being advocates at too uncomfortable position for others. And as we look at Measure A, we look at Measure G, we look at Measure U, we can all look at how we sometimes go on one side or the other and felt the repercussions of not being on the side as the other folks who felt like you should be there. Being called Uncle Tom or a poverty pimp was very unusual for me. But over the last couple of years, oh hell. I accept it as that's somebody's call. That's their thing. That ain't my thing. Because again, same work, same way since for the last 20 years, I can tell you that. And 10 years before that, developing that. So don't feel uncomfortable where I am, but the sister's right. And you're going to have to give me an easier way to call you by name so that when we come tight, when we offer this thing, I won't get it easier. Because what you have on front is I fam, and I said I know she don't let nobody just call her I fam.
No, you can call me Mo Dupe.
Going back to what you were saying earlier, that's kind of how I was feeling. We gotta figure out ways to move our agenda. We have to move our agenda individually as well as a group.
Well, one of the values that I suggest is that we value results over representation.
Right.
Because we're getting the banana in the tailpipe on tokenism. Yeah. Like we really are. And it's not, sometimes I feel like the person doesn't even know that they don't have any power. Like they're just getting put there because they have a black face, and they're really getting big up to the degree that they don't even understand what's going on, like that the part of the game that they're in. And so sometimes from the outside looking in, you can see that positions were created because they have fancy names. They put somebody of color in the position, or an ally. But there's no there's no real power. You know what I mean? And so even I have a friend who was developing job descriptions for diversity positions after the fight broke out. And I said that I think one of the important things to put in the position is that the person reports to the board rather than the internal leadership. Like they have to give either a quarterly report to the board to like shows that there's some that there are results, not just that we're making a good show of creating some type of change in a way that creates no change. Like that has been, California is the heavyweight champion of that, creating a show that looks like change but results in no change at all for the people who are supposed to be impacted. And so, because in a lot of ways, our public housing situation is very sad because it almost guarantees that a person will not ever own a home. If you live in public housing or you have some type of subsidized housing based on your income, as your income changes, so do your bills. So it almost guarantees that you might not move, and that also you will never own a house, because unless you do something super spectacular, color outside the lines, or do something illegal, you're probably not going to ever get a down payment together. So, I mean, these are the types of things that we have to start looking at because we're impacted differently. We don't have a lot of generational wealth in our community. And so it's highly unlikely that if there's 8 kids, if the house is either going to be left to all 8 kids or just one of them, still that results in no home ownership, because if you leave one house to 8 people, they're going to sell it. So it's like these are the types of things that we have to begin to look at and really strategize, because even in saying home ownership, that's limited. I think one of the things that we can be up to in Sacramento is land ownership. You can own land. There are, I think, 3 different companies within Sacramento County or adjoining counties that build modular and manufactured homes. You can own land and then put a house on it, and you can do all of that from living in an apartment. And then you have a home, and you can build on that. You can, build around it. You can do whatever you want to with your land. But we have to we need to begin to market these ideas. When we agree on a value, we have to campaign and enroll people in the idea that it's possible for us to have these things.
Merv is asking the question, how do we begin to heal the divide in the community so we can have a united agenda, or is it even necessary to heal first? I don't know. I don't say it like that.
Do we really want to have it? I mean, that's part of it. Do you really want to have it? Because if you want to have it, there is a way to go about it. Some of that is putting egos aside. Some of that is taking your hurt feelings out of the discussion and begin looking at what's best for the community. It may even appear like you're giving in to someone, but if you're doing it for the greater good, that's part of the process, in my opinion. I don't know for sure if people really want to get past it. Good conversation piece, but I don't necessarily know if that's what folks want to do. We'll see. We have 2 neighborhoods, District 8 and District 2. Quite frankly, we will see. If we can work together, if we can get through the hurts of this past election, I'm talking to my friends, whoever's listening, I'm saying if we can get through this, then it can be done. If we can't, then we can't put our egos aside. We can't put our hurt feelings aside. We can't talk about those things that need to be talked about to move forward. And I actually think it has to be done in order for us to really move forward together.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't
There
know.
are some we're not going to be able to do without doing them together.
Yeah.
You know, there's some things that if you can execute it and get some results to show with a little group of people that this is possible, then it will grow in popularity. But there are quite a few things that need to occur unless we're almost all on board. You know, because there's power in our numbers.
Yeah.
You know
That's
what I mean?
the piece.
There's great power in our numbers. And I feel like a lot of Black people have never experienced that. So maybe that's why they're so quick to kind of bow out. But also, I know that a lot of Black people have been injured in group movements. So that is also a contributing factor. Let's take responsibility for where we've been and what we've been doing, because some of what we've been up to in groups ain't been cool.
Nope.
Yeah, and I also think that the healing piece is consistent, right? It's ongoing. So, you know, sometimes depending on what it is, it's going to be tough to say, okay, we have to heal first and then do something. I think part of how you're moving through and progressing and communicating and understanding and being educated on something, part of that healing is going to come through that. And that doesn't mean everybody's got to, you know, kumbaya and agree and, you know, let's hold hands and, you know, all that shit stuff. Sorry, all that stuff. It's but I think it's you know, that's going to be part of it. I was telling my actually councilwoman-elect Bang, I said, you know, one of the things that you have to do is be able to look, as it was such a close race, and I think that people should look. And I also think District 2, D, that, you know, they should look at this as well, as really do a deep dive and really what separated, what were the issues. Look at your vote, right? Look at your voting and see why, who voted, what categories voted how, and get somebody on your team to do a deep dive about why that is, what it is, because regardless of how the numbers came out, you now represent that entire district, right? So you need to understand why certain people voted a certain way, you know, and you know, some of it's going to be because, you know, folks went with folks went with less, whatever. I actually supported even though I didn't get a vote in that district, but I actually supported, I was in favor of mine. That doesn't make me not in favor of less. I just like what her, you know, what her agenda is. But I think that, you know, people really have to take a deep dive about their district and why certain things. I think, you know, Warren's probably not going to catch up, but that means the incoming, you know, Mr. Solie, who I met, he came to our candidate forum when we held it, our coalition held it. He's gonna have to take a deep dive about really, you know, what's in that district, what it means, what he needs to do. He just can't take it for granted. And then, you know, that's how some of that healing, I think, will come through, that as people communicate, you know, and that's, I think, key. And I'm big on communication. I don't care, you know, it doesn't, again, have to be kumbaya, but if you don't have that nexus, that's your glue. If you can't sit at the table with somebody and be able to have a healthy debate, you know, be able to talk about issues, do a deep dive on issues, you know, be able to agree to disagree, and sometimes get mad. Right, my sister hung up on me the other day because, you know, she's a Bernieite, and you know, and I like Bernie, but you know, I was hitting her with some stuff, and she got mad at me, hung up. She loves me, she'll call me back, but you know, people have to be able to, you know, to really have those conversations, you know, and be okay, and then, you know, and then let's figure out where we go from here. So I think that's where the healing comes from as well.
I just think Black folks gonna have to chew the bubble gum and run at the same time. I just don't see where we have time to lay on the couch and be like, you hurt me, and I'm still, like, we've been doing that for like probably the last 100 years, probably more the last 30 years since coming out of the crack era. I don't know no one who was unscathed, and I don't mean like not just the seller and the user, but the community at large. You know, I feel like there has to be these moments where we can have those conversations. And what I love about memory or having experiences you can reflect back on, even in your childhood, is I do remember people being able to sit down and talk with each other. I remember that distinctly. Like if somebody was out of pocket, I remember people, not like I'm gonna go cuss them out. It's like, no, we're gonna have to talk about this because you don't even know me like that. or what do you hear, or the golden rule of if someone says like, hold that, let's get this person on the phone. That way you're gonna have to say it to that person. I grew up with those kind of rules, and I feel like sometimes we have our own ideal of what it feels like to be left out, and then we take other people's stuff that put on us and we put it on people because they feel like the person who put it on us. So it sometimes it makes it harder for us to sit down and be like, I'm feeling some way. Like, for instance, the whole misogyny thing. You know, we act like Black folks like we don't do stuff like that. We do. The same way women do stuff when they're holding up things because maybe they dating this person. I don't know. But it's hard for us to have the conversation to really talk about that, because sometimes I don't even think people understand that that's what they're really doing, because we're so used to leaving people out in order to advance a seat. Like, historically, we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
And we may not even know. We may have thought like, oh, they want me to get in this seat. But then they get there, they can't do anything for you because they don't want to appear that they're with you. So then it's some of this thing of like rejection, or, you know, like, I don't know. I just feel like a big part of talking about this helps us to look at that, because some of us think that's a roadmap that we're supposed to do in order to advance.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna have to step on some of y'all.
Well, you know, that's because I think that's a misunderstanding that has heavily supported, because the reason why you get to be the tip of the spear is because you got the weight of the handle behind you. You know, you cannot, you ain't gonna break skin if the spear's just rolling around on the floor, right? You know what I'm saying? So the whole thing is there has to be pressure on leadership to be accountable. You can't just wake up one morning and be like, I'm going to talk to the mayor about how they treat the Black people, and you ain't talking to no Black people. You know what I'm saying? We are having some funding and other things co-opted by other groups in the name of racial justice.
Oh, that's a big one.
Because we don't hold our own leadership accountable. So people know they're not coming for me. I'm about to go up in here and tell them I advocate for Black people. And that's what they're doing. They're going everywhere, applying for funding, all this, and getting it because they have a track record in other areas. But if racial justice wasn't your concern, you know, say 10 years ago, it's not your concern now. Go somewhere and sit down. Let's keep it real, because this is a problem. Like, we have to define for ourselves. Like, I keep saying this. Jerry Scott said that we're conceptually incarcerated. That we have to define for ourselves these terms: leadership, genius, what it is to have values, shared values. All these words that we throw around to get jobs, which is fine to throw it around to get the job, but also when it comes to you being the tip of the spear for your community, then you absolutely have to be clear in your understanding what that means. You have to have built your mission and a system around it, a way of operating. There has to be some type of rules of engagement, at least for you as the person who's out here saying, this is what I do. If you
have to own it.
Yeah, you gotta own it, and you gotta know what it is that you're owning. Like, you gotta know, and that's the thing. So when you have candidates running for office that are just Black, they're not necessarily connected to the Black community in any meaningful way. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
and they don't understand they don't understand the history of what type of Black people do you have here, because we're not all the same. And there are a lot of regional differences even within the city. Right. And you have places in Northern California where all the people who live in this neighborhood came from Texas. All the people who live in this neighborhood, what I mean? And so they have a certain way of being because of what their own history is. And so if you don't understand that even about Black people, then how can you say that you're representing me?
Right.
And so when we say, you know, representation matters, sure, it absolutely does. But I want the person who say they represent me to really be representing me.
So
Now,
no, go ahead and
go ahead, Daryl. No,
No.
I think I cut Daryl off.
No, I really was going to ask, so how do you identify those folks before they get in those spaces? Not so much the elected official, because it's easy there, but let's be honest. We have a number of new folks coming in around the city, around the county, coming into spaces with new positions. Don't know them until you meet them. Don't really know where they come from until you spend that time, you know, and as we get older, for me, maybe I may have the time and I'll do the outreach, but not everybody will do that. So, but how do we deal with that reality? And is it simple?
How many letters of recommendation does it take to become a NELP scholar?
Whatever number it
letters
took.
of recommendation does it take to be admitted to ALF? Whoever recommended you, you know, I'm going back to
I'm good with that.
Grooming candidates for these positions. And if you're not the person that we already had lined up on the bench for this, and you just come out of the blue and put your hat in the ring, that's great. But now you got to talk to us because we want to know, you know what I mean? We should, as a community, have people who are making these inquiries, right? I know Mama Ro has been one of those people. Like you interview all the candidates.
Try to.
You know what I'm saying? And that's public. But the people who are in leadership positions, who are representing organizations that say they advocate on behalf of Black people, those people should be held accountable. Then I'm going to call you and I'm going to be like, hey, do you know this person?
Well, and you're right. It goes back to I put on my lobbyist hat. It goes back to when I was lobbying. I used to lobby actually for law enforcement for years, and I would actually. So if I had to go and put an issue before whatever members or whatever committees, I'm not just looking at X, Y, and Z member who may be out of LA or Fresno. However, I have already done a deep dive. One, I've gone and looked at who contributed to their campaign. Right. And to see what those connections are. I looked at whether here, what their spouse may be affiliated with, so for instance, if you got a member and his or her, husband or wife is a nurse, they're going to have certain views about, nursing. So when you're dealing with semen, so I'm doing a deeper dive about, what's in the background. Right. And so it goes beyond this person. I'm looking at, what other if they've held some local office, or if they have what kind of voting did they do, right, when they held those offices? Because that's a telltale sign about how they may be looking at an issue that you're dealing with. And you got to do a deeper dive. And we own that. We have to own that and be able to do that.
Yeah. And where's your
what I was going to say, the part that's missing of the whole thing, that would work if we were together like a community. See, that whole concept would work because that's what worked in the 80s. That's what worked in the 90s when I was here. I was watching LA 92 when the Rodney King verdict came down and all hell was breaking loose in LA. I remember being with a group of Black women who went up to the Capitol and was like, we got to make sure that those women and children down there get what they need because we have pregnant women and children down there or whatever. And then watching them gather up supplies for us to drive down that freeway and go into LA, because that was a time when we had some kind of base, even if they didn't know everybody in the city. What I find in Sacramento, people, they'll hear us talking about black, and they'll go get their own Negro. They go get the Negro and relocate the Negro here so we can see the representation of a Black face, but yet no other community you could just roll in like that. They'd be like, ho, who are you? And we gonna make sure nobody know we don't know who you are, because you didn't come pay your respects. You didn't come check out the community.
Neutralized, though, those are campaigns and they could be neutralized.
No, I'm talking about in terms of people getting jobs, because I've seen it. I was in on a meeting and the woman who was in there with the beautifulest, blackest face I've ever seen did not come from our community. So then you have all the other groups in there, you know what I mean? And then you had this one Black person, and it's like, but she don't even know our community in Sacramento because she ain't from here and she's not connected to anybody here. See, back in the day, it's like if I rolled into LA, I had to go talk to Ms. Mobley. I had to go find the people who made that community and be like, oh my God, I'm new to your community. Can I come to a few meetings? Tell me about. No, people don't have to do that. You can just roll up in here, had just destroyed another city, come up here, and now it's like, I'm an activist now, without nobody saying, ho, who are you? Who are your people? Where you come from? What you about? That feels like a struggle for me in being in Sacramento. I'm an East Coast.
It is. It's one of the peculiarities.
You roll up in Philly like that, you be rolling out.
Sacramento. It is one of the peculiarities of Sacramento because Sacramento, what they'll do more likely is find out who's the person that they're supposed to speak to, and then try to disenfranchise them in some way. You know what I mean? That's why we don't have a lot of Black institutions. We have some. You know, probably Roberts Family Development Center is among them because you've been around for a long time. And so it's just that you are Earth Mama Healing, you know.
But I'm an extension of somebody else, to be honest with you. Hey, my stuff ain't new. I'm the latest installation, if you will.
Well, where's the Birthing Project?
But that's a whole other story. But because it's gone, I'm still here. Yeah, I have to remind people that somebody did that before. Right. Because that's how they keep us held up. Like, I'm new. I'm not inventing nothing new. Yeah. I'm the latest continuum of something that happened 30 years ago when I was like younger and didn't know much. And they were an extension of somebody else in LA, or where were they from, Pennsylvania 30 years ago. I mean, it's always these leaps. And so sometimes we'll talk like we are it. And it's like, you ain't leave me hanging out there like that. I come from a root. You ain't gonna have me on no branch and then you just cut the branch off and then no, dude, I'm connected to a trunk that's a part of a root.
Right.
So you just can't knock me down because I'm gonna have to remind you, you know, of what our history is. And I feel like in this city, and Sacramento does have some deep roots, but I think the best way to keep people preoccupied is to make them think they don't have any.
Yeah.
See, everybody else here is building with their roots, and they're not ashamed of that. But you know what I mean? So part of our survival has always been, what does this mean for other people? Or how that's a part of slavery. It's like, I can't see myself being free unless you're okay. It's like, who does that? You think Harriet Tubman was like, we're gonna make sure the master is fed before we leave? He's like, look, we gotta get out of here. But I just feel like that's a part of knowing our history. And so when people come into a place, like, no, we've had all kind of awesome history in this town, straight up. But if nobody tells you and if people don't speak it because, you know, they got wiped away or people felt disingenuous because sometimes we walk in like no one was ever here before. That in itself can make you feel some way like, wait a minute. We didn't just start saving Black babies. Somebody was already doing that. You know, in other cultures, you have to honor the people who came before you do something on their land. You just don't roll up in there and be like, this is it. They be like, oh, we want to give thanks for the person who came before us. You know what I'm saying? Before we put down what we gonna put down. I just feel like there has to be more of that shows our value as a people. So even as we look at an agenda, we really got to look at, I was thinking agenda like more like housing. Like, how do we implement some of those ideas you talked about in terms of buying property and then building houses on it? Our friend lives in a private area that I didn't even know existed until she invited me to her house.
Yeah.
I was like, what part of Sacramento is this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's gated, but you don't even know it's there.
And nice and you like,
I roll past that all the time, going back and forth to people's houses. I'm like, I never knew what was behind there. I didn't know it was there, but somebody developed that. You know what I'm saying? How do we get to that? And I also feel like at some point, we're going to really have to figure out, this is just the stuff, because I feel like as much as people see us or reality TV shows acting a fool, I think they ought to be able to see us having a thoughtful conversation. But I also think, I think we tried this before, off this, we have to be able to have those sit down. Because I also remember people sitting down on Tuesday mornings, or, you know, I know Mr. Woodrow had his group of men that he would sit down and have breakfast with. Because sometimes I would see him and he'd see my little nephew, and, you know, but it's there. Sometimes I feel like that is missing. So when we're talking about community, we don't even know if somebody gets asked to be on the committee. It's not for people to say, well, I don't know how she get to be on that committee. She's not qualified. Instead of saying, you on that committee, holler at me so I can bring you up to date.
Yeah.
Not like,
we need to go back to good old community, grassroots advocacy and communication. You know, and that's baby steps. I don't have a magical solution to how we do that, but I do think that is, and again, it goes back to me, communication. if you're communicating, you're educating, right? If you're educating, you're bringing awareness. If you're bringing awareness, then you're looking at some action, right? And so somehow I think that we, and it's not going to be, I think, an overall massive thing that you do, but I think it happens probably on individual issues, or agendas that come up. It's how you get back to that grassroots, advocacy and communication, and to me, it's not whether, like, I've talked to a lot of my neighbors around here who think that I know all this stuff because I'm in the political, they think I know everything about all these initiatives, which I don't. But, I tell them, look, one of the things you have to do is you have to do your research. You need to, I'm not here to tell you how to vote. I'm not here to, I talk to a lot of people about Measure A. I said, but you have to do your homework and then figure out where you are on that, right? I'm telling you from my lens, but then you need to look at it from your lens and then still go do your homework, right? And but let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. So I think we miss that. That doesn't go on as much as I think it should, which is one of the things why I was, so adamant about, whatever happened with Measure A, and I wanted it to go down. I wanted it to be separated out. I'm like, if Measure A is strong enough, it needed to be strong enough on its own. Don't add that equity piece in it because it pissed me off. I'm like, you had a group of people sit around the table and say, well, let's throw this equity pieces in there because how are we going to get the Black and people of color vote, right? And I can guarantee you that it was probably some, I don't know, Daryl, I might be wrong, but it was probably some whoever was advising them that didn't look like me. So let's do that. Now you had other groups at the table saying, yes, this is a great thing. But then it goes back to, I didn't see any outreach into the community about that, right? I saw a little bit of outreach after the measure was out there and qualified, but there was no outreach, to say, hey, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're thinking about equity pieces. Let's have a discussion, with the exception of Betty from the NAACP, who did her conversation. So to me, we're missing that piece of the community discussion and dialogue, and how to do that.
Yeah.
To me, like a lot of political situations, there's always a backstory, and how Measure A came together. There's a backstory to it, and the folks who were involved know that backstory. And I understand and I respect it, your position or how you look at it. But I think that there was some. The Strong Mayor Initiative was not brand new to us. It was not. Kevin tried this 2 previous times. It got killed both times because it was Kevin. It was thought that it would move because Daryl was moving it. The things that got attached to it got attached to it. Politically, there was a thought of, hey, put this here. This will bring people to the table. I'll be honest with you. I'll go back to looking at those who opposed it and say, well, maybe we should have sat down and really talked this through as we looked at it for systemic change. So for me, that's how I looked at Measure A, totally systemic change. The system that's in place right now with the city manager working the way it does, it has not worked for the Black community. So in my opinion, that's how I looked at it and said, we talk about systemic change. We've been talking about that for quite a while now. I saw this as systemic change. So that was part of the reason that I favored it, because of systemic change. I'll tell you one thing though that we keep talking about that we don't recognize. In other communities and other districts, there is a historical perspective on how people follow in line. District 6, good one. District 6 is that one. So it was a Daryl, Dave, Kevin, Eric. Bam, 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 bam. And you can say what you want to say, but whether we accept or not, that's the way that rolled. And the assembly seat the same exact way to the Senate. Who threw it off was Richard Payne. So now as we look at Angelique and Eric Garrett, there are opportunities that are there if one of the other wins. And I'm going to be curious to see who's going to replace them when that time comes, and who we as a Black community are going to line behind. Because those are two strictly, and then if you look at, let's go even better. Cooper will probably move on. He'll probably run for sheriff. Come on, let's be honest. Let's talk about politics. That was the purpose of the show. So then who's going to be there? Who will you look at for that assembly seat? And is it worth us begin really talking about who we should look and who we should back in those spaces? So
but that goes back, that goes back, Dee, to my point about looking proactively about these seats that will come open and build a bench. Start doing, seeing what's out there. Right.
All of it to me is open. It's worth it. But to go back to the question that Brother Mervin put out there was, is it worth us coming back together? Hell yeah, it's worth us coming back together. Or else we certainly will be split for the next races. And we can, you know, at some point, you're right. You know, representation, politics is important, but somebody who gives a shit about us should really matter. I would like to think that somebody who looks like me, who's been in the fields doing the work, is somebody I can count on. And
who has a measurable results.
Yeah.
There you go. Measurable results. There you go.
Measurable results. Like, you know, if you say you've been at this for, I've been working with the Black community for blah, blah, blah number of years. And then, well, what have you accomplished?
Show me.
You
Yeah,
know,
show me.
Because if you want to be in office, then it's gonna, if you simply don't have any results, it may even just be a self-esteem issue, but you don't get to be in office till you get yourself together. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not
that's true.
environment. It's not that type of party. Like, yeah, we need to heal, but that's separate from getting the results that we need.
Yeah.
We're gonna, like Rose said, we gotta walk and chew bubble gum. If we can't look beyond, oh, this person had this thing happen in their past or whatever, they need a hug. Go on and hug them, but don't vote for them. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, don't vote for them. Like, I mean, ain't nothing wrong with hugging somebody. If you don't love, let's go feed their family, whatever.
There's some folks who ran. There's some folks who ran for office, you know, school board races. Folks, Tamika ran for one of the fire district seats or water district seats.
Yeah.
You know, young sister out of Foothill Ranch, Crystal Harding ran for office over there. She got elected. Kamika got elected. So there are young people there are people who are being elected, you know, and we got to start looking at what else can they provide for us. But also, we need to begin holding them accountable now.
We have to support them.
Yes.
And support doesn't mean just voting for people.
Amen.
It also means giving them the information that they don't have.
Yes, it does.
So if you're worried about something that's happening in your district, then you need to let them know this is what's going on over here. So don't get up talking about it and you don't know everything that's happening. You know what I mean? We need to just stop watching people fall down and being like, "Oh, you clumsy."
Wow.
Like, you know, we gotta
ooh, look at them. They didn't see that hole coming.
You know,
that was cute. That made so much sense.
There's some information you can know in advance before you get in these positions that will be helpful for you. And it's mostly like blueprint stuff. Like, this is what you need to be checking in on every year. It's what you need to be checking in on every quarter. And then once they're in office, if you know some stuff is jumping off, then pull their coattail and then watch what they do, and that will determine whether they're reelected.
Right.
No, true.
So on a different tune to really back what you're saying, that's also in leadership, period. So for me, you know, we had the worst year politically you can have. Got investigated 12,000 million times, audit up and down, public scrutiny and all that stuff. Got through it and still working through the pieces. But I'll tell you, more than anything else, I picked up the phone and I called those who are behind me, who are running organizations now and making sure that they recognize this is why we had challenges. This is why we had challenges. We focused here when we should have focused there. And Lisa will tell you, one of the things that I had to learn was that. And I had to learn a hard lesson. But it is what I had to learn, but it's also what I'm responsible for educating those coming behind me to do this work. So as leaders, we don't have the ability to say, I got through it, now it's your turn. Hell with that.
Succession plan is that's a whole hour.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, we okay with that, but because I don't know you well, the role will tell you. I'm gonna probably get the number from you, call and say, hey, come by the center, let's sit down and talk. Because that's what has to happen more and more. We have to get beyond just casually knowing each other.
Absolutely.
If somebody comes to your office, if you know, say a group of Black people come to your office 3-4 deep, whether they take you to lunch or whatever, and then they try to give you some information and say, like, if this is related to your mission in this way, this is how we see it, and so we feel like you need to do something or make an adjustment here or whatever. Like, it's not for people to get offended. It's for you to have an honest conversation.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's not within my capacity. If you want me to do that, then we need to find some money here so I can hire somebody to do that.
To do it.
Here's a way that I could do this part of it. Or
Mhm.
okay, I agree, or no, I don't, that's trash, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
And then, you know, let the chips fall where they may. Because
Yeah.
we're gonna have disagreements. We're gonna have
Right.
arguments, we're gonna fall out. But the thing is, if we're not communicating and we're not being honest in our communication, then the whole thing is it's just a show.
Fake.
Right on.
Nobody wants to show up for that.
That's true.
Nobody wants to take time away from raising their kids, feeding their family, making their
Yeah.
money, whatever it is they're up to in the world, to participate in a show.
Yeah. I also think it's time for us just to close some ranks. You know, you got to close ranks, and closing ranks is not as simple as just closing them, but it's kind of like, I think we're just in this time where we just gonna have to have some hard conversations with each other, because we're not gonna survive if we don't do it. As much as we're unique, I don't care if you're a Black conservative, you're a Black liberal, whatever the hell you is, at the end of the day, you're Black. And so when people come for you, they really ain't checking for your card. They don't really care who you are. You know what I mean? How much you agree with them. You know what I mean? Or disagree. But I feel like we're just in this space where if you're looking at history, that's the one thing we keep stumbling over, is us being able to sit down with each other and be like, I'm feeling like this, or this is my perception of you, or this is what I felt, or this is whatever that is. We gotta do that, else it's gonna be harder. It's gonna be harder for the next generation. Because what I don't want to ever see, to be honest with you, seeing the next generations talking the way I'm talking right now, that like breaks my heart, because they have no idea, like I have no idea all the sacrifices that happened for me to be sitting here in my living room talking to y'all on the internet.
Right.
I can't even imagine my ancestors knowing that my life was going to be like this. I mean, I know they prayed for it, but they couldn't phantom. It's just kind of like at some point we got to be willing to rely on each other enough to have those hard conversations so we can move on, because the truth of the matter is we really do need each other.
Yeah.
That's just the honest to God truth. We just need each other as much as like, I got this. Dude, I ain't got it if I ain't got you. And we don't have an understanding. I'm not saying we got to be the best buddies, but you know, it's just something about being able to have those hard conversations. I think we have been through some stuff in this city, and I think now is the time for us to have those hard conversations and just get this stuff out the way. It don't mean we're gonna be thick as thieves, as the old people say, but it do mean we can have some mutual respect for each other. In my time in traveling in the South, one of the things I really loved about the South, I still love, is when I walk in places, people may not know my name, but they will acknowledge my presence. They look right over there and do this, or morning or something. They're gonna be like, I see you. I'm not gonna act like I don't see you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that makes all the difference in the world when we just acknowledge each other, even if we don't use our words, but there's a way of acknowledging each other. But I think sometimes we're always acknowledging the hurt, and I've been guilty of that myself, than saying, you need to talk to this person. Somebody checked me on something so beautifully, the way that they did it, all I could do is just be like, you right. And I'm gonna go ahead and take that rock out the back of my backpack, or however the thing went. But it was just kind of like, that's true, because I was kind of petty. Yeah, I mean, I was very petty. But the person was like, we still rolling. That don't mean I don't like you, but I'm gonna need you to understand this, and that's not what we do as a people. The person reminded me that. And I was like, I forgot, but thank you. And I didn't even get pissed off. I just went ahead on and do what I had to do.
You know what, Ro? I think to piggyback on all of what you just said, I think we have to also find a way to figure out. Like, I'm old school. I'm older, right? I just turned 64, right? And so, we have to figure out how. My sons always say, "Mom, you just say that so people can say you don't look your age." I said, "Yep, you're right." Because I'm vain. But I think we also have to figure out how we, as the older seasonal generation, as my grandbabies who want to stay in my will call me, the more seasonal folks, how we are able to listen. We have to listen and have the conversation with the younger folks that are coming up, because majority of this, a lot of it is really their time, right? And just because we do certain things the way we think we want to do it, we have to figure out how we listen and have a conversation with these folks, that it may be a difference of opinion on how we get there, but it's how we get there. Right. I was a friend of mine, Kelly Rowe, told me one day, we were at the I think it was the Black Women's March a couple of years ago, and it was really good. You know, the youngins had put it together, and it was really good. And I was saying, man, I wish they would have had this person there, that person there. And she said to me, she said, you know what? She said, this ain't about what you thought, what you think you would want. She said, this is the way that these are people who they identify with, right? These are people that they, you know, it's coming from, you know, they're in accord. These are the people that, and I said, huh. All right, I'm gonna sit back and be quiet because she was absolutely right. You know, I was naming off old school folks that these folks may not even identify with, right? The youngins weren't identifying with, but the folks that they had were really good. I was just like, maybe we should have had this. But she said, this is their time. This is who they identify with. So let's support them in that vein. And I was like, okay. And that shut me up and hit me to the core. I was like, all righty then. And it was good. It was really good, you know? So, yeah. So I just think we need to be able to figure out that conversation as well. You know?
I just feel like we got to figure out how to make space for us all. Because this is what I do know. And being in other cultures, they have space for everybody.
Yeah.
They really do have space. I wouldn't want to be nowhere where I couldn't have no elders. I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. It's like being in the world without a root. Like it's like being a leaf and not being attached to nothing because you can't do it. I just feel like that's a lesson. We have to be. This is the kind of society where you have to really. You're playing in a game or in a arena with people who you survive because you did have that extra something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even though they took everything, you still had Big Mama in them. You did have Granddad in them. And so I feel like that's the part, because once people try to divide you from that, then they're going to rip you to shreds. That's what the movie Time Machine is about. They done remade it like 10 times. And it's always about, if we can take the young from the old, then we get to rule them forever.
Yeah.
And I always remember that. So I definitely think there's definitely a place for young people. But I watch how young people struggle because they don't have the history of the knowledge. So people be playing the same game on them that they played on our great-grandmother. Because you don't even know your great-great-grandmother. You don't even know they did this back in 1620.
That's the part that wasn't written down.
Right.
It was the game that they was playing on them. They just wrote down, even if you just write down the facts, like you'll never know that part. So you need that historical perspective. You need somebody who lived through that or lived with somebody who lived through that to tell you, well, this is what really happened. And this is how this really impacted Black people. We didn't even start doing such and such and such till this time. We was doing this. You know what I mean?
That's true.
We don't even think about this till this. Like the way that Black people rely on supermarkets is new. That's new. A lot of us grew our own food. Right. A lot of us were.
What you gonna say, Daryl?
Bro, you're gonna have to excuse me. I'm gonna have to bow out. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, wait, we can ready to wrap up.
I really have enjoyed it. I look forward to being involved again. Ladies, thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of your space. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Hey, as we wrap up, family, and that's my dude. So as we wrap up, what are some of the things that can be takeaways? Because we talked about a lot of stuff. I think all of this stuff does lead into politics. I know we have to figure out what things we should be asking folks who are in political positions. Also, I think we have to ask some things of our leaders in our community. And what are we willing to do that?
Well, I think the biggest thing we all talked about, the biggest thread is communication. That's the biggest thread in whatever you're going to do. It's how we communicate to get there, whether it's building the bench, whether it's figuring out, what issues are, whether we're looking at how we can, continue to do this voter engagement. A lot of the things that I thought I had your name. I've been saying it, I've been saying it where you couldn't see me, mouthing it. And then I got ready to do it and I still screwed it up. A lot of things that you were saying in terms of, how, this connectivity, a lot of that is going back to just how we figure out how the hell we talk to each other in what vein. Right. So that's what I took away from this entire conversation. Although there's a lot on the table and really good things, but at the end of the day, if we can't communicate how we do these things and discuss these things and in our own with our own lens, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
What about you, Ifa Modukwe?
I think I agree. We need to tell the truth quicker and faster. And if you are a part of the community leadership, or see yourself as in leadership in the community, and a young person comes to you and says that they're running for office, or they want to run for office, or they have political aspirations, then that is the moment that you become responsible for telling them the truth.
Absolutely.
This is what you need to know. Here's the part I know. Here's the part I don't know. Here's who you need to go talk to. Do you understand how this works? Okay, tell me how it works so I can see if you know. You know what I mean?
Right.
Really,
that's true.
Stop being nice. We gotta stop being so nice and be loving to one another. You know what I mean? Be willing to build in the face of a little bit of, maybe it's not even conflict. It might just be, you know, a little bit challenging sometimes. But we got to be willing to overcome that pleasantry thing we got going and really get to the blood and bone of building our community.
Right. I think that mentor piece really is strong when it comes to women, because there are things, let's keep it real. I don't care what, you could be black, blue, brown, purple, green, white, whatever. If a man is going to decide he is going to run or do something, he is going to do it. Women tend to think, well, we overthink it. Am I ready? Or we let people get in. I'm like, I always tell the youngins that I meant to own this, right? Whether it's your time or not, own it, own what you want, and then let's figure out, how we get you there. But women will tend to minimize things, right? Whether it's raising money, whether it's putting out there that you're running, whether it's asking my baby girl Tamika that you mentioned earlier, who ran for the flood, the water board. I don't even know what the hell that is, right? But all I know is when I knew I don't, but I started doing some research because I was thinking, if she ran for it, it's got some connection to, I know what water is. You turn my goddamn sink on and there's my water, right? But but there is a lot of economic, justice things that happen with water and all that good stuff that I know that I don't know, right? But she ran for it, and she's part of the coalition that I have. But when she said to me, she said, "No, Lisa, I found out that she was running on Facebook, and I called her. I said, T, really? Sister, you didn't tell me you were running. What do you need? We have to have that same voice, because had that been a man asking or running, we would have known that. We would have known that. So we got to do the same thing. We have to be just as aggressive professionally, personally, everything else, politically, as the next.
People to wait their turn. I'm so offended by that shit.
No, really?
People to wait their turn. It's offensive. Like, what you mean wait your turn? Why we gotta wait our turn? I'm so sick of hearing that expression. Ain't your time. How you tell somebody it ain't their time?
I know that really gets to me, because I'm like, really, and there's so many intelligent, like I think Tamika is one of the most articulate, intelligent people I know, right? I've gotten to know her, over these last 2 or 3 years. Love her. And I see her, she's going to do some things in leadership that I think that she's probably not even aware she's going to do. But it was the same thing when I was in the assembly and I was chief of staff to the speaker. Our biggest thing was getting the caucuses, the female caucuses, the women, black, white, brown, whatever, to raise as much money as the men, right? And to get those that we paid, the fundraisers, to treat the women as important as the men. Don't minimize how much, she can only raise. No, bullshit, right? They're trying to win an election. They're trying to win a seat. You need to treat them as viable as you treat, a male counterpart. But then you have to own that as well. And say, I want to raise this amount, and I'm going to raise this amount, and here's why I'm in it.
Wow.
So, okay, let me get off my boat.
No. Daryl, I'm so grateful. It's been such a great conversation. I just think we have to keep having these conversations, the ones that we can have in public, because I think it's healthy for people to see us thinking it through. Like, you know what I mean? There's no magical wand, but you have to think it through. I'm always reminded when I was growing up watching Bev Smith. I think I still watch some of those. I mean, I do watch some of those now on YouTube, just watching Black folks who had difference of opinion sit down and really talk about some things. And they didn't do it where they weren't speaking. It was kind of like, you got to learn that all Black people don't think the same way, but you do need allies everywhere.
How are you gonna come up on a solution that doesn't exist if you don't talk to people who don't think the same thing you do?
Absolutely.
I'm not looking for nobody to just be like, yeah, what you said. You know what I mean?
Well, sometimes people say that. Yeah, what she said. I'm like, well, say it.
So no, you asked Willie, what did she say? You tell me what you thought she said. Right?
How do you flesh it out
Yeah.
If
Right.
you don't have you need some resistance in order to pull it apart and really get
Right.
to the part that says, okay, now here's what we do first.
Right.
Because we might have these grand ideas and they are wonderful and they sound great, but when it comes time to like, okay, what do we do first?
Yeah,
Then,
sure.
you know what I'm saying? Somebody got to be like, nah, you can't do it. And then you like,
Right.
I bet you I can.
I bet you I can. Let me show you how.
That's real talk, though. That is
No, that is
Thank y'all
true.
so much. Don't hang up. Let me shut this down. Don't
Okay.
hang up though, y'all. Thank y'all for joining us on this looking at the Black agenda. This is going to be a topic of many conversations. Since the election is over, this is where the real work starts, family. Where we have to come together and roll up our sleeves and get the work done. It's been done before, and it's always happening every day. So we'll see you all next week. Peace, fam.